The intriguing hook. Valor stood outside the human engineering lab, her fingers tightening around the datapad in her hands. Her long, deep blue tail twitched nervously behind her, betraying the calm look she tried to keep on her face. The bright lights of the space station's corridor reflected off her smooth cerulean skin, making her feel even more exposed. She swallowed hard. This was a mistake. She should have read the fine print before agreeing to this. The door in front of her slid open with a soft hiss, but she didn't move. Inside, she could hear the faint hum of machines and the occasional sound of metal tools clinking together. A human voice, low, steady, and undeniably familiar, muttered something about calibrations. Ethan Carter, the man who had done this to her. Well, not on purpose. She had signed up for the enhancement procedure herself. She had wanted to be stronger, faster, able to match the other species in the Galactic Alliance. The Zyari were known for their grace and agility, but they were physically weaker compared to many other races. Valor had never liked feeling weak, so when she had heard about the human-engineered augmentations, she hadn't hesitated. Except, she had not expected this. Heat crept up her neck as she looked down at herself. The biosuit she wore felt tighter than before, though the material was adaptive. She wasn't sure if it was just her imagination, or if the suit was really pressing against her in ways it hadn't before. Her enhancements were too effective, not just in terms of strength, but in other ways as well. Valor groaned, pressing her fingers against her forehead. She couldn't believe she was in this situation. The human augmentation technology was supposed to perfectly adapt to its subjects' subconscious preferences, optimizing balance, coordination, reaction time, and apparently, physical appearance in ways she hadn't expected. And now she was too shy to even step into the lab. The door, still open, let out a small warning beep, reminding her that she was blocking the entrance. She had to go in. She couldn't avoid Ethan forever. Taking a deep breath, Valor steeled herself and stepped forward. The lab was brightly lit, filled with glowing monitors, mechanical arms, and diagnostic machines. The scent of metal, heated circuits, and something vaguely earthy filled the air. It was always like this in human labs. Warm, filled with an energy that made everything feel alive. Ethan stood at the central workbench, hunched over a holo-display, his sharp eyes scanning through streams of data. His dark brown hair was slightly messy, like he had been working nonstop. His sleeves were rolled up, showing the lean strength in his arms as he adjusted a control panel. He looked up when she walked in. "Valor," he said, smiling. "Right on time. How are you feeling?" She froze for half a second, then forced herself to move forward. She cleared her throat, fighting the sudden urge to turn around and leave. "I am fine." It was a lie. Ethan didn't seem to notice. He tapped on his datapad, pulling up her bio readouts. "That's good. The enhancement process was a complete success. Your muscle density has increased by 23%, your reaction time is twice as fast, and your metabolic efficiency is at peak optimization. Honestly, the results are better than I expected." Valor nodded stiffly. She didn't know how to tell them that those weren't the only things that had changed. She felt different. Everything felt heightened. Sounds, touches, even the way her body moved. And worst of all, she felt it most when he was around. Ethan turned to her, his hazel eyes scanning her face. "You seem tense." Valor almost flinched. Had he noticed something? "I'm just adjusting," she said quickly. Ethan frowned. "That's normal. Your body is still getting used to the modifications." He walked over to her, datapad in hand. "But if anything feels off, you need to tell me. There's always a small chance of unexpected side effects." Her heart skipped a beat as he stepped closer. Her body reacted before her mind did. A sudden, warm pulse spread through her chest, and she had to stop herself from taking a step back. No, she couldn't let him notice. She wasn't sure if it was the enhancements or her own nerves, but Ethan's presence felt different now. more intense, more distracting. "Everything is fine," she said quickly. Too quickly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" She nodded, forcing herself to stay still. Ethan studied her for a moment, then sighed, shaking his head. "All right, if you say so." He turned back to his workstation, adjusting some data logs. "Just let me know if anything changes." Valor let out a slow breath. This was going to be harder than she thought. The enhancements weren't just physical. They had attuned to her deepest instincts. And now, standing so close to him, she realized something terrifying. Her body knew something before her mind had fully admitted it. She was attracted to him, and thanks to the hyper-adaptive human technology. Now, her body reacted every time he was near. She was completely screwed. The unexpected enhancement. The memory of the procedure played in Voeller's mind like a bad simulation loop, one she couldn't escape no matter how much she tried. She had been so confident back then, so sure this was the right choice. She could still hear the voice of the human scientist who had walked her through the procedure. "The enhancements will adapt to your natural physiology and subconscious optimization needs. Your body will determine the most efficient modifications." Back then, it had made perfect sense. She had wanted to be stronger. She had wanted to be faster. She had wanted to prove that her people, the Ziyari, were just as capable in combat as the genetically superior races in the Galactic Alliance. But now, standing in the lab weeks later, she realized that the most dangerous enhancement had nothing to do with strength or speed. It was something else entirely. The procedure, a choice she didn't fully understand. The day of the procedure had been routine. Weiler had walked into the enhancement lab with zero hesitation. She remembered lying on the medical pod, feeling the cold press of the biogel against her skin as the human design nanites entered her bloodstream. The process was supposed to be painless, but she had still felt something. A strange warmth spreading through her limbs, sinking into her bones. As the machines worked, a soft AI voice had echoed around her. Optimization process engaged, searching for primary enhancement priorities. The words had barely registered. She had already listed her goals: combat agility, strength augmentation, and neural processing speed. The system should have prioritized those things, but human technology was different from what she was used to. Human engineering had a strange philosophy, one that focused on efficiency above all else. It didn't just enhance what you wanted. It enhanced what you needed most, even if you didn't realize it. Waking up. The first sign of trouble. The moment Valor had regained consciousness, she had known something was off. Her body felt lighter, but somehow more centered. Every movement was sharper, more precise. She had always been agile, but now her reflexes felt almost instinctive, as if her muscles knew what to do before she even thought about it. She had tested her strength, gripping the edge of the medical pod and crushing the reinforced alloy slightly beneath her fingers. That had been expected. What she hadn't expected was the way her uniform suddenly felt different. At first, she thought it was just a minor size adjustment, a simple miscalculation in her biosuit's adaptive fit. But then she caught sight of her reflection in the diagnostic display. Her heart stopped. The enhancements had done more than just refine her combat abilities. They had sculpted her, reshaped her physiology to the optimal form her subconscious desired. And somewhere, deep in the hidden recesses of her mind, her instincts had apparently decided that looking impossibly attractive to a certain human engineer was part of her battle optimization strategy. Her curves had subtly changed, just enough to be noticeable. Her posture had adjusted ever so slightly, making her movements seem more fluid, more graceful. Even the way her skin reacted to proximity had altered, an unexpected effect that sent heat rippling across her body whenever someone stood too close. Whenever he stood too close. It had taken less than a minute for the full realization to crash down on her. The enhancement process had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It had made her better. It had made her stronger. But it had also attuned her to something far more dangerous: her own hidden desires. The silent struggle, keeping it together. Valor had avoided Ethan for a full 2 weeks after that day. She had thrown herself into combat drills, hoping to shake off the strange new awareness that pulsed through her body whenever she thought about him. She had pushed herself harder than ever, testing the limits of her enhanced reflexes, her increased strength, her sharpened focus. But no amount of training had prepared her for the real challenge, standing in the same room as Ethan Carter and pretending nothing had changed. Now, as she watched him scroll through her diagnostic data, oblivious to the silent battle raging inside her, she fought to keep her expression neutral. "Your numbers are incredible," Ethan mused, frowning at the screen. "Reaction time is off the charts. Neural feedback loop is integrating perfectly with the augmentations. Energy output is stable." Volder forced herself to breathe evenly. It was fine. She just had to act normal. She just had to not think about the fact that her body was reacting strangely to the way he smelled, like warm circuitry and something strangely grounding. Ethan turned to her, holding up the datapad. "Any strange side effects?" he asked. Her mind screamed. Her heart pounded. And for the first time in her life, Volder, the warrior, the strategist, the pride of her species, lied through her teeth. "None." Ethan smiled. "Good. Then let's run some live combat tests next." Volder smiled back. And internally, she panicked. The awkward encounter. Volder had faced many battles in her life. She had fought against war-hardened mercenaries, navigated the lethal politics of the Galactic Council, and even survived an encounter with a void leviathan, a creature so massive that entire fleets avoided its territory. But none of those experiences had prepared her for this. Sitting across from Ethan Carter in the middle of his engineering lab, while he casually analyzed her biometric data. This was her hardest battle yet. The tension of proximity. Ethan tapped his datapad, scrolling through the information with the kind of focus that only humans seem to have. A mix of curiosity and precision that made them terrifyingly efficient innovators. "Your metabolic rate is incredibly stable," he mused. "Most species need an adjustment period after augmentation, but you're adapting fast." Volder nodded stiffly, gripping the edge of the diagnostic chair she was seated in. "That's good," she managed. In truth, she wasn't adapting. Her body was betraying her in ways she didn't fully understand. She could feel the way her skin reacted to his presence, a slight, unnatural warmth blooming in her chest whenever he leaned too close. Her newly enhanced biosensory field had made her hyper-aware of everything around her, especially him. The faint hum of his neural interface, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the way his body radiated warmth, subtly affecting the air between them. Her fingers twitched, fighting the absurd urge to move back or forward. A flustered mistake. Ethan turned the screen toward her, oblivious to her internal struggle. "Here, see this." He pointed to a highlighted section of the data. "Your muscle response times are clocking in at almost triple the standard ZRE threshold. That means your body is reacting before your brain even processes external threats. We're talking near instantaneous decision-making." Volder barely heard him, because the moment he leaned forward, the scent of his skin, a mixture of metal, heat, and something vaguely like cinnamon, hit her full force. And in that split second, her enhanced instincts made a horrible decision. Her body moved before she could stop it. She jerked back, her muscles overcompensating for the sudden action. The chair beneath her scraped violently against the floor, its legs catching at an angle. And then it tipped. Before she could even process what was happening, she felt herself falling, except she never hit the ground. Caught in his arms. Ethan reacted faster than any normal human should have. Before gravity could complete its work, he moved, arms snapping out, catching her mid-fall like it was nothing. For a second, everything stopped. Volder found herself half reclined in his grip, her body suspended between the chair and his arms. His fingers pressed against her back, steady and firm, holding her in place effortlessly. Her enhanced physiology went haywire. Every sensory node in her body lit up, registering his warmth, the subtle flex of his muscles, the closeness of his breath against her cheek. The worst part, Ethan didn't even seem fazed. "You okay?" he asked, lifting her with zero effort and setting her upright like she weighed nothing. Völler's mind screamed. Her body refused to function. This was bad. This was so bad. "Ah, yes," she stammered, which was not the response she wanted to give. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head as he reached for the chair, pulling it back into position. "Guess I should have warned you. Muscle recalibration takes a while to adjust. Your strength's been enhanced, but your brain's still working with your old balance models." He had no idea that her reaction had nothing to do with muscle recalibration. None at all. Völler quickly sat back down, practically locking her joints in place to prevent another humiliating mishap. Ethan gave her an amused look, but said nothing as he resumed checking her data. She exhaled, slowly, carefully, trying to bring her heart rate down. The suspicious discovery. "Okay," Ethan continued, flipping through the diagnostic files. "There's something really interesting here." Völler immediately tensed. Did he notice? Did he somehow detect the new, unplanned reactions her body was having? Ethan frowned, tapping on a segment of her neural response graph. "These results, they're weird." Her stomach dropped. "Oh no. Your nervous system has developed an entirely new response pattern," Ethan went on, eyes scanning the data. "You're registering heightened reactivity, but it's localized, almost like a bioimprint." Völler stiffened. "Localized?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, your body isn't just adapting to generic combat enhancements. It's responding more intensely to specific stimuli." She swallowed hard. "Stimuli?" she echoed, praying to every deity that he wouldn't figure it out. Ethan rubbed his chin, thinking, "It's like you've become hyper-attuned to certain environmental factors. Your biochemistry is reacting to something specific, but I can't tell what yet. It could be a new spatial awareness function, a pheromone adaptation, or maybe even—" He stopped. Slowly, he turned to her. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, she saw the scientist in him shift gears, from curiosity to realization. Völler felt her entire body freeze. Ethan's gaze narrowed slightly. Then, after a long pause, he grinned. "Wait a second. Oh no. Is it me?" Embarrassment and discovery. Völler had fought pirates in zero gravity. She had stared down High Chancellor Tor without blinking. She had once walked into a Celari hive chamber and negotiated with their queen without breaking a sweat. And yet nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the terror coursing through her veins at this very moment. Ethan Carter, human engineer, problem solver, and the biggest threat to her sanity, had just put the pieces together. His grin widened. "Oh, this is interesting." Völler's throat went dry. The impossible realization. She tried to keep her expression neutral. She really did. But her body was actively betraying her. Her newly enhanced physiology, her overly optimized biofeedback system, and her hypersensitive nervous adaptation responses. They had all decided, without her consent, that being within Ethan's personal space was a priority one event. This was not combat optimization. This was catastrophe. Ethan folded his arms, tapping his fingers against his bicep. "So let me get this straight. The augmentation nanites synced with your subconscious. They adjusted your biological responses based on your unspoken needs. And now," he tilted his head, studying her as if she were a fascinating lab experiment, "you only get this reaction when I'm nearby." Völler's entire soul tried to exit her body. She scrambled for a response, any response, but her brain had short-circuited. Ethan leaned in slightly. She felt it again, the heat spike. Her body recognized him, reacted to him, treated his presence like some kind of biological imperative. This was not happening. That's... Ethan exhaled in amusement. Huh, that's actually incredible. The augmentation worked so well that it formed a neural imprint on me. I've never seen anything like this. Voller clenched her fists. You are enjoying this too much. His grin widened. Oh, absolutely. A failing defense. Voller tried to salvage what was left of her dignity. This is a temporary malfunction, she stated, forcing authority into her voice. It will stabilize. Ethan shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe your body permanently registered me as an integral part of your optimized state. Voller glared. If that were true, I would have you removed from my environment immediately. Ethan's eyebrow quirked. But you haven't. Silence. A very, very long silence. Her jaw tightened. She had no counterargument. Because he was right. She should have demanded a full recalibration by now. She should have been speaking with the medical team, isolating the anomaly, correcting the malfunction. But instead, she had spent weeks avoiding him, training alone, and telling herself that the issue would go away. Because deep down, in some cursed part of her subconscious, she already knew the answer. It wasn't just the technology. It wasn't just an accident. It was her. The augmentation hadn't chosen Ethan at random. Her own subconscious. Asterisk, asterisk, her own unspoken instincts. Asterisk, asterisk had selected him. And now, thanks to human innovation, that inconvenient little attraction had become a full-blown physiological response. A dangerous experiment. Ethan tapped his chin thoughtfully. Well, there's only one way to be sure. Voller frowned. Sure about what? He set his datapad down and took a single deliberate step closer. Her body reacted instantly. Her heart rate spiked. Her breath hitched. Her skin tingled with hypersensitivity. Her entire system screamed at her that something was happening. Ethan's eyes flickered toward the biometric scanner still running in the background. Yeah, that's a pretty clear reaction. Voller snapped. You are testing me like an experiment. To be fair, Ethan said, holding up a finger, you are one of the most advanced test subjects in human augmentation history. It would be irresponsible not to take notes. Voller hated how much she wanted to throw something at him. But worse, far worse, was the undeniable fact that he wasn't wrong. She was a living anomaly. And now he was actively confirming that this anomaly was centered on him. The breaking point. Voller took a deep, steadying breath. Fix it, she said firmly. Ethan blinked. Fix what? She gestured at herself. This. Whatever this is, I refuse to have my battle readiness compromised by some ridiculous biological imprint. Ethan looked her over, tapping his fingers against his datapad again. Well, the easiest way would be a full neural recalibration, he admitted, but that has a risk of destabilizing the other enhancements. Voller hated that answer. Fine, she said through clenched teeth. Then find another way. Ethan grinned. There is another option. She narrowed her eyes. What? He shrugged, entirely too casual. We just need to desensitize your reaction to me. Her mind stalled. What? You know, Ethan said, gesturing vaguely. Exposure therapy. The fastest way to override a conditioned response is to expose the subject to the stimulus repeatedly until the reaction neutralizes. Voller stared at him, processing his words. Her brain shut down. You mean? She started. Ethan grinned. Yep, you and me, spending a lot more time together. A cold dread slithered down her spine. This was worse than she imagined. The external conflict. A sudden threat. Voller hated everything about this situation. She had faced humiliating scenarios before. Diplomatic meetings gone wrong, high-stakes battle simulations that ended with her crashing headfirst into a training drone. But nothing compared to this. Forced proximity training. Ethan's brilliant idea. Her worst nightmare. For the last 3 hours, she had been trapped in the confined space of his private lab, subjected to the most excruciating mental trial of her life. She had hoped it wouldn't work, that prolonged exposure would somehow make the issue go away, that if she sat close enough to him, walked next to him, even stood shoulder to shoulder in silence, her body would eventually normalize the response. But no, her enhancements had doubled down. Every time Ethan moved, her body tracked him before her mind did. Every time he spoke, her nervous system processed the sound before she could tune it out. It was a full sensory betrayal, as if the very technology meant to enhance her had decided that Ethan Carter was the gravitational center of her universe. And worse, Ethan knew it. He had stopped pretending to be professional hours ago. Now he was enjoying himself. "You keep fidgeting," he noted, adjusting a holo display on the console in front of him. "That's new. Maybe I should write that down." Voller gritted her teeth. "I am not fidgeting." Ethan glanced at her tail, which was swishing aggressively behind her. He smirked. "Sure." Voller's eye twitched. This was unbearable. She needed an escape, a distraction, anything. And as if the universe itself had heard her desperate plea, the lab's emergency alarms suddenly blared to life. A klaxon. Red lights flashing. Ethan's smirk vanished instantly. Voller snapped to full alert. "What is that?" Ethan was already moving, hands flying over the console as a holographic security feed flickered to life. "Proximity breach detected," he muttered. "Unregistered vessels just dropped out of FTL on the edge of the station's perimeter. They're not broadcasting alliance codes." Voller's blood went cold. "Pirates. Or worse," Ethan muttered. "Station security's already mobilizing." But a shockwave rattled the room, the sound of distant explosions shuddering through the walls. The station was under attack, from internal chaos to combat mode. Voller's instincts snapped into place. Everything else, her embarrassment, her irritation, her unfortunate body malfunctions, all of it vanished in an instant. Battle mode engaged. "Where's the closest weapons cache?" she demanded. Ethan was already yanking open a compartment under his workstation, tossing her a pulse rifle. "You tell me, Captain Combat Enhancements," he shot back. "You're the one with the super reflexes." Voller caught the rifle in one smooth motion, her fingers curling around the grip with practiced ease. She ignored his sarcasm. "Where's the breach?" she asked. Ethan pulled up a station map. "Mid-level docking bay. They're trying to cut off station control from the core systems." Voller's eyes narrowed. "Then that's where we're going." Ethan hesitated. "We should wait for security tow." "We don't have time, Carter." Her voice left zero room for argument. Ethan exhaled sharply, then grabbed a compact blaster from another compartment. "Fine. But if we die, I'm putting bad tactical decision-making in my report." Voller didn't bother responding. She was already moving. Into the fire. The hallways reeked of burning metal as Voller and Ethan pushed forward, pulse rifle primed in her grip. The sounds of battle echoed through the corridors. Plasma rounds, heavy footfalls, the sharp crackle of energy shields absorbing fire. A squad of station security officers rushed past them, already engaged in combat. But Voller's focus was ahead. The docking bay doors were partially blown apart, the edges still glowing from the detonation. Beyond them, a squad of heavily armed intruders. And they weren't just pirates. Voller recognized their armor immediately. Mercenaries. Not just any mercenaries. Onyx Syndicate. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't just a random raid. This was a targeted assault. Ethan cursed under his breath. Why do these guys always pick the worst times? Voller didn't answer. She was already moving. The fight begins. A plasma bolt streaked past her head. She dodged before she even consciously registered the attack, her enhancements firing on all cylinders. The mercenaries didn't expect her speed. She was on them before they could react. She twisted low, her enhanced reflexes making her almost untouchable, sweeping a mercenary's legs out from under him before he could fire. She flicked his rifle out of his hands and snapped the butt of her own weapon against his visor, sending him sprawling. Ethan, because he was a human and humans were insane, had already jumped into cover and started laying down suppressing fire. "Could use a little help here," he shouted. Voller spun, disarming another mercenary mid-charge, using his own momentum to hurl him straight into Ethan's firing zone. Ethan fired. The mercenary dropped instantly. "See," Ethan called. "We make a good team." Voller didn't respond, because something felt off. There were too few of them. This was too easy. And then, her instincts screamed. She whirled, just in time to see a secondary squad of mercenaries breaching from the side passage, heading straight for Ethan. A moment of instinct. Voller moved without thinking. Before the first mercenary could fire, she was already in motion. She crossed the distance in a flash, her body reacting before her mind could process the action. And then, she grabbed Ethan, not just pushed him out of the way, not just shielded him. She wrapped her arms around him, twisted their combined weight, and threw both of them into cover, just as a plasma barrage ripped through the air where he had been standing. They landed hard. Ethan's breath hitched. Because Voller was half on top of him, one hand braced against his chest, the other gripping her rifle. They locked eyes. Ethan's expression flickered between surprise, confusion, and something else she refused to acknowledge. The moment lasted too long, too intense, too charged. Then, not to ruin whatever this is," Ethan said breathlessly, "but they're still shooting at us." Voller wanted to throw him into the enemy line. Instead, she forced herself to move, gritting her teeth, ignoring the very real, very inconvenient way her body had reacted. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The climax. Fighting side by side. Voller knew she needed to move. She had enemies in front of her. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, the sharp scent of burnt alloy filling the docking bay. Her rifle was primed, her enhanced reflexes calibrated for battle. And yet, she was still half-pressed against Ethan Carter. Her arms had acted before her brain, pulling him to cover. Her hyper-attuned nervous system had triggered an override command the second he was in danger. And the worst part, he noticed. Even under fire, pinned down behind a supply crate, he noticed. Ethan's hazel eyes flickered with realization, a slow smirk creeping onto his face despite the literal chaos around them. "Wow," he said, voice just barely audible over the gunfire. "So you do like me." Voller's entire body tensed. And just like that, the real battle began. Suppressing fire and suppressing feelings, instead of acknowledging his absolutely incorrect and absurd assumption, Voller shot up from cover and fired 3 perfect shots. 1. A mercenary's weapon was blasted out of his hands. 2. Another went down with a precision shot to the leg. 3. A detonation pack on a crate exploded, sending 2 more enemies flying. Voller ducked back down, heart pounding from combat, not from anything else. Ethan whistled. That was hot. Voller glared at him. "Focus, Carter." He grinned, shifting his blaster to stun mode as he fired at 2 more advancing enemies. "Oh, I am very focused, just on multiple things at once." Voller took a deep breath. No, she would not let this become a thing. She grabbed her wrist console, scanning the enemy formation. There was a pattern. A staggered advance, covering fire from above. But their timing was too precise. Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't just a raid," she muttered. "They have a tactical coordinator. Someone is feeding them real-time adjustments." Ethan ducked under a plasma bolt, grimacing. "You're saying they have a nerd?" Voller nodded. "A very dangerous nerd." She flipped through station schematics on her holo display. "We need to cut their connection." Ethan looked over her shoulder. "Where's the signal relay?" She pointed to the far end of the docking bay, where a mercenary with a high-tech visor and a control pad was shouting orders. Ethan sighed. Yeah. Okay, that screams nerd. Cover me, Vuller said, already preparing to move. Ethan caught her arm. She froze. Wait, he said, more serious now. You're faster than them, but they'll expect that. You need a distraction. Vuller blinked. And what do you suggest? Ethan flashed his signature reckless grin. Something really stupid. The stupid plan. 30 seconds later, Vuller hated everything about this plan. Because Ethan Carter, the human engineer with absolutely zero survival instincts, was currently standing in the open, waving his blaster in the air like a lunatic. Hey, helmet guy. He called to the tactical coordinator. Your mercenary group sucks. You can't aim for. A hailstorm of plasma fire rained down on him instantly. Ethan dove behind a cargo crate just in time, laughing breathlessly. Yep, that worked. Vuller didn't wait. She launched forward at full speed, her enhanced muscles kicking into overdrive. The world slowed. She sidestepped enemy fire effortlessly, her movements faster than they could track. The tactical coordinator barely had time to react before she slammed into him, grabbing the control pad from his hands. The moment she disconnected the relay, the mercenaries hesitated. Their perfect coordination broke apart. Vuller wasted no time. She turned, sweeping the mercenary's legs out from under him, disabling his visor with a single precise shot. Carter. Now. Ethan popped up from cover, spinning his blaster to high stun. He fired, hitting the remaining mercenaries one by one as their tactical formation collapsed. Within seconds, the fight was over. Vuller exhaled sharply, her pulse still racing. Not from exertion, not from battle, but from something far more dangerous. Ethan stood up, grinning like a maniac. Well, that was fun. Vuller gave him a look. Do you have any self-preservation instincts? Ethan shrugged. Apparently not. But hey, it worked. Vuller sighed. I should let the mercenaries shoot you next time. You won't, Ethan said smugly. Vuller opened her mouth, then snapped it shut. Because, to her absolute horror, he was right. The aftermath. A dangerous shift. The station's security forces finally swept in, mopping up the remaining enemies. Ethan leaned against a crate, watching her. So, I gotta ask. Vuller closed her eyes. No, you do not. Oh, I definitely do, he said, crossing his arms. You tackled me earlier. Like full body, protect the squishy human tackle. She refused to look at him. You cradled me, he added. Like a delicate. Vuller turned sharply. If you finish that sentence, I will break your datapad over your head. Ethan grinned. See, that's what I love about you, Vuller. Always so expressive. She inhaled slowly. No, 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 no. She was not dealing with this right now. Mission is over, she said flatly, turning away. I need a recalibration scan. And a drink. Preferably strong enough to erase this entire conversation from my memory. She started walking. Then she heard Ethan's amused voice behind her. You know exposure therapy means we're gonna spend even more time together, right? Vuller kept walking. She refused to acknowledge him. Refused to let him see the way her fingers tightened into fists. Because, for all her training, all her discipline, the worst part of all, her body was already looking forward to it, the aftermath, and a not-so-subtle confession. Vuller had been shot at, thrown into zero gravity without warning, and forced to negotiate a peace treaty while suffering from a concussion. But none of those experiences compared to the slow, agonizing walk back to the lab with Ethan Carter right beside her. Because he was smiling. Smirking, actually. Like a human who had just figured something out and planned to be incredibly annoying about it. She refused to look at him. He refused to stop grinning. They had survived a mercenary assault, neutralized the tactical coordinator, and single-handedly saved half the station's docking sector. By all accounts, this should have been a victory. But for Valor, this was a catastrophe. Because no matter how much she wanted to ignore it, one fact had been painfully obvious during the fight. Her instincts, her very body, had chosen Ethan Carter. And he knew it. The moment she knew she had lost. Ethan stretched his arms, rolling his shoulders as they stepped into the quiet corridor leading back to his lab. That was a fun night, he mused. Valor exhaled sharply. That was not fun. Really, because I distinctly remember you tackling me to safety. She gritted her teeth. I was preserving a valuable asset. Ethan's smirk deepened. Right. An asset. Her tail twitched aggressively. She hated that he was enjoying this. She hated more that her body had acted without hesitation, that the first thing she had done in the heat of battle was protect him. It had been instinct. And that was the problem. Because instinct didn't lie. Back in the lab, no escape now. The lab doors slid shut behind them, the station's distant alarms finally fading. Silence settled between them. Valor placed her pulse rifle on the workbench, rolling her shoulders to release the last bit of tension. She needed to leave. Needed to go anywhere that wasn't here, alone, with him. But before she could move, Ethan spoke. So, when were you going to admit it? She froze. Her pulse jumped, traitorous enhancements picking up on her reaction instantly. Admit what? She said carefully. Ethan tilted his head, watching her like a puzzle he was putting together. That the augmentations aren't the problem. He leaned against the console, crossing his arms. That you've been avoiding me because your body figured something out before you did. Valor's jaw tightened. You are making dangerous assumptions. He laughed, light and easy, as if this was fun for him. Am I? Because every time I get close, your heart rate spikes. Your skin temperature changes. And let's not forget the best part. He took a slow step forward. Valor backed up instinctively. Mistake. Because that was confirmation. Ethan's grin widened. See. That right there. Valor's entire soul wanted to eject from her body. The final stand. Denial versus reality. I do not. Ethan took another step. She backed up again. Her back hit the workstation. She was cornered. Ethan noticed. Do you want me to prove it? He asked, voice low, too amused, too damn sure of himself. Valor's eyes narrowed. If you take one more step, Carter, I will. What? He smirked. Throw me into a wall. You already did that once. Didn't change anything. Her teeth clenched. He was right, and she hated that. Because no matter what she told herself, no matter how much she tried to push it down, the truth was already written in her neural pathways. Her instincts were designed for efficiency. And they had chosen Ethan. Not because of the augmentations. Not because of the stupid exposure therapy. Because she wanted him. And now, thanks to human tech, her body wouldn't let her lie about it. Ethan must have seen the exact moment she realized it, because his smirk softened, just slightly. You don't have to say it, he murmured. I already know. She exhaled sharply. You are insufferable. I know. A pause. Then, fine. His eyes flickered with curiosity. Fine. What? Valor crossed her arms, steadying herself. You want proof. Fine. Before she could hesitate, before her brain could tell her not to, she grabbed the front of his jacket and pulled him forward. And kissed him. The endgame move. For the first time all night. For the first time since she had met him. Ethan Carter shut up. Because Valor kissed him like she fought. With precision, with power, with complete control. She felt the exact moment it hit him. The small intake of breath. The sharp shift in his stance. The momentary surprise before he melted into it. Her body, finally satisfied that it had resolved the internal conflict, eased the tension in her muscles. The neural reaction calibrated. The system accepted its new constant. When she pulled back, she did not let him speak. She enjoyed the rare moment of Ethan Carter being speechless. Then, with a final glare, she turned toward the door. "This never happened," she said over her shoulder. Ethan, still recovering, coughed. "Yeah, sure, never happened." She was almost out, almost free. Then, Ethan, still grinning, called after her. "Same time tomorrow." Valor didn't look back, but her tail flicked slightly before the door shut behind her. She was so doomed.